This crappy year is finally coming to a close, but it would leave a sour taste in my mouth to end it on a bad note, so I'm gonna dedicate my last video of the year to focus on some of the more pleasant moments 2020 had to offer by reminiscing about a few of the best games I've played in the past 12 months. Being forced to stay inside for 3/4 of the year, and still counting, proved to be a difficult challenge, but the silver lining was the extra time I had to play more video games. Gaming has always been a way for me to unwind from whatever is bothering me. It's my reset button to get me ready for another day, and it's become an even more important tool as it's one of the few shreds of normalcy I still have. So here are my top 4 games that got me through the year and helped keep my mind off the crap fest that was 2020. Starting off at number 4 is 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. This was actually a game I wasn't sure I was going to get since it didn't quite look like something I would typically play. However, I'm a fan of Vanillaware's work, especially when it comes to their beautiful art, so I decided to take a chance. Despite my initial impressions of the game, it turned out to be far better than I gave it credit for. It has a very strong story with interesting mysteries involving alien invasions, time travel, and kaijus that kept me hooked till the very end. The characters worked well together to create a compelling story. They each had their own unique personalities, problems, and strengths that helped them grow into likable characters. It's rare for me to become attached to everyone in the game, but 13 Sentinels managed to pull that off. Combat was also pretty fun, despite the way it looks. It started off slow with limited attack options and small groups of enemies, but the battles gradually became larger and more fast-paced, making it more engaging. The progression helped with that as well, since there were an array of useful skills that could be unlocked to cover any situation. In addition, Sentinel stats could be further enhanced to fit various playstyles. Though 13 Sentinels did many things right, it didn't quite hit home like some of the next games on the list. Sitting at my number 3 spot is Dragon Ball Kakarot, which might be a surprise for a lot of people since it had a pretty mediocre score and was not reviewed very strongly by gaming outlets. There were some minor flaws and a few bugs, such as combat being overly simplistic with little options or invisible NPCs, but there were easy workarounds that didn't dampen my enjoyment of the game. The story was also just a retelling of the same events I've seen countless times already, but the nice cel shading art style gives these scenes a cool new lens to look through. However, even with these tiny issues, I'm a huge fan of Dragon Ball and RPG, so this was a match made in heaven. Kakarot was everything I wanted from a Dragon Ball RPG. I was free to fly around the Earth at my leisure, visiting some of the iconic cities from the show to collect items, do side quests, or play minigames. The RPG elements added good depth to the game, where characters become stronger as they level up and new abilities can be unlocked through their progression system. Combined with an adjustable community board that gave additional passive bonuses, there was enough mechanics to keep things engaging. Prior to Kakarot, the only Dragon Ball RPGs available were the Game Boy Advance games, which, don't get me wrong, were very fun and great at the time, but they also had limited systems. Kakarot was the first game that really went the full mile with the exploration and RPG mechanics, fully satiating my craving for a fun Dragon Ball RPG. I just hope this game was successful enough to create interest for more Dragon Ball RPGs in the future. My number 2 game of the year comes from my favorite series developed by Falcom called Kiseki, so it should be no surprise that the finale to the Trails of Cold Steel games would rank high on my list. Trails of Cold Steel 4 is the final chapter in the Erebonia arc, and one of the best Kiseki games to date, filled with surprises, unexpected twists, and a lot of excitement. The story, characters, and world building have always been what made Kiseki games great, and Cold Steel 4 continues to build on those strengths to deliver an amazing experience. This was the game where all the time I spent investing into the world building and all the character stories paid off. Playing through all 8 of the previous games has led to this moment where I can see all the pieces fall into place and get the bigger picture. Not to mention, this is also where my favorite heroes from those games finally get to meet up. New bonds are formed between friends, former enemies, and countries in order to fight against a greater evil. While Kiseki excels in storytelling, the difficulty of these games is also something I'm fond of. The highest difficulty, Nightmare, made the game much more challenging to get through. Nightmare made me utilize every tool I had at my disposal in Cold Steel 4. I had to think about my actions in combat, use brave orders effectively, and strengthen my character builds when I could to overcome tough but exciting battles. As much as I loved Cold Steel 4 and everything it did, there is one game that blew it out of the water. It's a game I couldn't stop playing and gave me a little happiness and joy during a time where there wasn't a lot of it. But before I get into that, there are a few honorable mentions I want to bring up that didn't make the list. The first of these games is Persona 5 Royal, an entry from another one of my all-time favorite series. However, this was a game I was largely unimpressed by, for the simple reason of it being an enhanced version that didn't offer enough changes to warrant another 100-hour playthrough. And oh boy, were people not happy with what I had to say about it, especially the not liking Kasumi part. Despite it not hitting the mark for me, Persona 5 is one of the best JRPGs I've played, hands down. And the new antagonist and final dungeon in Royal were designed magnificently. If Royal was my first experience with the game, it would definitely rank high on this list. Every part of it is done exceedingly well, to the level that very few others can compare to. Persona 5 has one of the best stories I've had the pleasure of playing through, accompanied by the most banger of soundtracks. The dungeon crawling is designed with good puzzles and a fun sneak mechanic that made exploring these places exciting. The combat felt great, utilizing weaknesses and knockdowns in addition to the return of negotiations. And its art is top notch with its use of colors and shapes to draw the eyes of players. So even though Royal wasn't for me, it deserves to be mentioned at the very least. Final Fantasy VII is another game I wanted to bring up because I loved the original, and I have really high hopes for the remake as a whole. I was ecstatic when it was first announced at E3 in 2015. With such a great game as a source, there was no way it could be bad. Even after announcing their multi-release plan with the first game focused solely on the events in Midgar, I was still very happy that a remake was happening. Some people hated the structure, complaining about not getting the full game and blah blah blah. But I liked that they were trying to expand the world and work on improving the character development. Being able to see what life is like for the regular slum folks and learning more about the characters in Avalanche made the stakes feel more meaningful. I did curb my expectations a bit before diving in though, because I knew it would be better to approach it as an introduction to the series rather than a full-fledged experience. In the grand scheme, it didn't do much else besides set up some of the world building. There wasn't a good build up to the climax, and there really just wasn't a strong climax in general, so the story didn't have much of an impact. Still, just being able to see the high-definition Cloud and Sephiroth models were amazing by itself. The combat also looked cool and was pretty fun. It was done well, utilizing the variety of playstyles provided by each of the 4 characters to defeat whatever enemies may come. Final Fantasy VII Remake did a decent job as an introduction, but I believe it'll truly shine once the whole story is released. And last but certainly not least, my game of the year is the latest release from Sega's hit franchise, Yakuza, with Like a Dragon. Initially, I was worried about Sega taking the series in the wrong direction with the new combat system, and I was also unsure if the new cast of characters could measure up to the beloved Kiryu and Majima. I was hoping at the very least I wouldn't hate it if these things didn't work out. But here I am now with it being number 1 on my list. Definitely not something I expected if I were to view the 2020 lineup back in 2019. Yakuza Like a Dragon was something I couldn't stop having fun with. Ichiban was the protagonist I needed to see in a game, with his wackiness and optimistic attitude, never letting the unbeatable odds get to him, and working through his struggles like the hero of his favorite game, Dragon Quest. He was someone who lifted the spirits of not only his teammates, but me as well. I couldn't help but root for him, and he was a very fitting hero in this story. But it wasn't just him that made it great. The other characters were captivating as well, each bringing something unique to the table that made the adventure exciting and emotional. And let's not forget the unparalleled side content that only Yakuza can pull off. It had the most wild side stories that had me laughing the whole time, and a great collection of minigames to keep me occupied for hours on end. With 3 explorable districts and so much to do, there was never a moment where I was not having a blast. Yakuza Like a Dragon gave me the best experience I could hope for with memorable characters and great gameplay. It came out at an amazing time too, near the end of the year, making it the perfect game to close out 2020 with. So that's it, that's my list. Let me know what you think of it and if any of these games was your game of the year, or better yet, share your top picks of 2020. Thank you all for watching, and here's to a hopefully better new year.